Now, more homeowners are struggling to pay up, given all the added costs to owning a home these days. It's driving more South Africans to rent instead of buying. Let's talk some more about this with property economist Erwin Rode, who joins us virtually from Cape Town. Erwin, thank you so much for your time. Now, this was a hot topic on social media this week especially, and I think it was triggered mainly by a column, a rather thoughtful column, I thought, written by the columnist with the Financial Mail, Simon Brown, and it was entitled, "Why Renting, Not Buying a Home is Best." He says there, it's not a popular view in South Africa, but there are far too many added costs to home ownership to make it truly financially worthwhile. And it really set the cat amongst the pigeons. And I think it's because so many of us, at some point in our lives, get the piece of advice from somebody older, more experienced, and you get told this well-worn adage, why rent? Why pay off somebody else's bond where you could actually be paying off your own bond? You own something, and it's investment that you can then do with what you will later on in life when you're close to retirement. Has the time to put that adage to bed or to bury it deeply somewhere? Has it finally arrived? Where do you stand on this debate?
The time actually arrived, well, what's it now? It's 2023. It's probably arrived in 2013, thereabouts. So the property cycle, that is the house price cycle, is a very long cycle. In South Africa, historically, it was between 15 and 20 years. The current cycle will end up to be more than 25 years, it seems. Which means we've been in the downswing phase of this cycle, looking at prices in the real terms, in other words, after having taken out inflation. So what's been happening over the many years already in South Africa, especially outside of Cape Town, because Cape Town seems to be a little special case.
In more ways than one.
Yes. Well, as you know, it's semigration, so it seems it's having a positive effect. Our economy grows slightly better than the rest of the country. Not by much, but slightly. And it seems it's picking up steam, by the way, but we are off target now. So after having taken out inflation from your growth in prices, house prices in South Africa have, generally speaking, been in a downturn. In other words, becoming cheaper and cheaper in real terms. Even though we may feel it's not the way, but when you have inflation of say 5% at the moment, it's higher. Then, then you must have at least 5% growth in nominal prices just to make up for the inflation, right? So, looking into the future, peering into the future as best as one can, I keep on saying it's never been easier to look into the future, the medium-term future, that is 5 years into the future in South Africa than it is currently. Because of why? Because of Eskom, of course. I mean, just the Eskom factor makes it very easy to be negative about South Africa's economic future. So, what are the two most important drivers of house prices are the growth in the economy. In other words, people have, in real terms, more in their pockets on average. And secondly, interest rates. Obviously, the higher the interest rates, the lower the affordability. So these two factors work against each other or with each other. At the moment, they are both negative factors. We've got relatively high relatively high interest rates, and we've got economy that is, well, stalling. So these two factors make it pretty certain that over the next 5 years, we're going to see very little growth in house prices, believe you me. Now then, the logic behind owning a house has always been that you're going to get capital growth. So if you're not going to get capital growth and you've got to gear your investment with a 90% mortgage bond, guess what? You are into negative territory. The financial people call it negative gearing, right? So you're actually sitting with a very poor investment purely from an investment point of view. But of course, there is something else about owning a house, and that's this immaterial thing of ownership. And I own this like I own my wife, and my car, and my toothbrush and so on. So it's not that simple. But in general, if you are going to buy a house at market values today, with a view to renting it out, chances are you're making a poor investment. The question is, what's the alternative? okay, if you have cash and you can buy the house with cash, of course, no mortgage bond, then then it becomes much well, much better as an investment because you don't have negative gearing now, right?
Yeah.
But if you to take a bond of 90% for argument's sake, oh boy, you are into negative territory from an investment point of view from the word go for another 5 years or so. That's my best estimate, if not more. It all depends on how quickly this economy of ours is going to be turned around. And as you know, it takes about 10 years to build a power station. Okay,
Yeah.
we hope it will be green and not coal, but or,
But the point that you're making there as well is almost a golden thread in that things change. You spoke about 2013, you're talking about a medium-term cycle, you're talking about 5 years and where we're going to be with Eskom, we don't really know. And the point that Simon had made here that for me that really stood out, because we've heard a lot of these arguments before, is that your personal circumstances, especially your financial circumstances, change every few years. He said 7 years, it could be 5 years. And our circumstances, all of our circumstances have changed for various reasons. One of them being Eskom, the other one being the pandemic that we lived through and all the changes that that brought as well. And then he mentioned things like marriage, kids, divorce, jobs, also something that was impacted by the pandemic. So the reasoning that people have for buying a property, let's say in 2009, let me use myself as an example. 2009, you buy a house, a great area, Joburg, good price, things are moving, blah, blah, blah. And so, more than a decade later, everybody's circumstances have changed. You actually do have to re-look that investment. My question to you then, as a property economist, is if you've made that decision some 10 years ago, is it possible to re-look that investment 10 years down the line and decide to change gear? Or are you stuck and the best thing is just to put your head down and try and keep your head above water and keep paying off this investment that you decided to make a decade ago?
Well, property is not a very liquid investment, to put it mildly. So I wouldn't, at the drop of a head, sell my house if I were to own a house. No. Just on the word of Erwin Rode saying in Cape Town, that's not a good time to invest in a house. I myself own a house, which I fortunately bought a long time ago, 20 years ago. And so I had a good growth rate from 500,000 rands to about 2.3 million now.
Sure. That's a Cape Town growth for you.
Yeah. Well, in many other parts of the country, I think it was similar, excepting the dorps that are going down, that have already gone down. But as a generalization, the thing is, it's got a cycle. Like all investments, it's got a cycle. It's got a good time and a bad time. It's as simple as that. So on top of that, as you correctly point out to me, there's the question of personal circumstances, which change over time, right? So all these things, obviously, one has to consider. But I wouldn't sell a house at the drop of a hat unless, of course, I've got financial problems. In that case, of course, you must do it rather sooner than later, of course, because you don't want to be caught with a house with a mortgage bond that you are behind with your payments.
Which we're finding that post-pandemic, a lot of South Africans are struggling with right now. It's an emotional one. You spoke about that. And then in South Africa, we have to look at the historical context as well. We're dealing with a generation of first-time property buyers who couldn't buy because of various reasons, including the political regime at the time. So a lot of that fueling this desire to own your piece of land, as it were, in South Africa. But without really looking at the numbers. So all of those things make for a rather difficult cocktail, I suppose, to navigate for many South Africans.
I would like to mention two things in this regard. First of all, it's a culture we have in South Africa. And I'm not saying the culture is wrong, but our culture is, own your home as soon as possible, right? Because it's been shown, it's been proven over the long term, it's a good investment. And in the long term, it's a reasonably good investment. By long term, I mean 20, 30 years, and if you're lucky and you're buying it at the bottom of the cycle, then it's a fantastic investment, especially if you're geared 90% then. I mean, if you had bought a house in 2000, say, or 2003, you would have had a wonderful run until 2009, which would have been a fantastic investment. But who can read the cycle like that? I discovered to my surprise the other day. I googled my own name, and I see in 2005 I already forecast that house prices were too high. Well, I said house prices were too high already,
Yeah.
and it lasted another 4 years or 3 years before they then tumbled. So that's the first point. We've got a culture that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's a forced way of saving, even though it may not be a good way of saving in some years. In general, it's a forced way of saving, right? So, secondly, culture is relative. One of the most successful countries in the world are Germany and Switzerland. Guess what? In Germany, 50% of families don't own their house. In Switzerland, it's 60%, more or less, right? It differs from city to city, but in general. What are we saying here? These are very successful countries, financially, economically speaking, but most of their citizens are renting. It's not the be-all and end-all. It depends on many other things, how you manage your personal finances. For instance, let me give a practical example. If you were to do your homework today and you decide, and your homework shows that if you were to rent a house at the moment, it will cost you, say, 15,000 rand, argument's sake. But if you were to buy it, your installment would be, say, 20,000 rands a month, right? Something like that, for argument's sake. That's 5,000 rand difference, which at the moment, if you were to save that for, say the next 5 years, diligently, 5,000 a month, you put away, you sign a debit order or whatever, and you do it diligently. Then after 5 years, according to my argument, you will be better off financially than you are if you had bought that same house and you had paid an installment of 20,000 or whatever per month.
That's a very practical and thoughtful way for us to end the conversation, and that's really going to blow a lot of people's minds, I think. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That's property economist Erwin Rode. Very wise words coming, and honest words coming from him as well. The times, they are changing, but the problem is that it won't stop changing, I suppose, is the lesson there.